Welcome to Slumber Darkly, where the darkest true stories are whispered to you in the quiet of the night. Tonight, we delve into the chilling tale of Robert Hansen, a man who turned the remote wilderness of Alaska into a hunting ground for his own twisted game. This is the story of a predator who stalked his victims, not for survival, but for sport. An unsettling reflection of the darkest corners of human nature. Settle in as we explore the horrifying case of the Butcher Baker, whose reign of terror left a trail of bodies across the Alaskan frontier. This story is extremely dark, and I must provide a trigger warning for those sensitive to certain topics, such as murder and sex crimes. I ask that you please do not proceed. In the vast wilderness of Alaska, just 25 miles from Anchorage, lies the Knik River Valley, a rugged, isolated area known for its breathtaking beauty and its rich wildlife. It's a place where nature reigns supreme, where the land is as untamed as it is unforgiving. But in the early 1980s, the Knik River Valley became infamous for something far darker. It was here that the decomposed remains of young women began to surface, each one telling a tale of unimaginable horror. The story begins on September 2nd, 1982. Two off-duty Anchorage police officers, Audie Holloway and John Daly, were hunting game along the Knik River when they stumbled upon something that would haunt them forever. As darkness began to fall, they noticed what appeared to be a boot sticking out of the sand. Upon closer inspection, they realized it wasn't just a boot. It was the remains of a human body, partially decomposed and buried in the sand. Recognizing the potential crime scene, the officers carefully backed away, making note of the location before returning to report their grisly discovery. The case was quickly assigned to Sergeant Rolly Port, a meticulous investigator known for his attention to detail. Port, a decorated Vietnam veteran, arrived at the scene and immediately began documenting everything. He had the remains photographed from every angle before carefully sifting through the surrounding sand for evidence. His thoroughness paid off. Among the dirt, he found a single .223 caliber shell casing, an ominous clue that hinted at the brutality of the crime. The remains were transported back to Anchorage for further examination. The autopsy revealed that the victim was a young woman, likely in her 20s, who had been dead for approximately 6 months. She had been shot 3 times with a .223 caliber weapon, and traces of an ace bandage suggested that she had been blindfolded at the time of her death. Her clothes, which showed no bullet holes, indicated she'd been killed while naked, only to be redressed by her killer before being buried in the shallow grave. It took over 2 weeks for the victim to be identified as Sherry Morrow, a 24-year-old dancer who had gone missing in November 1981. Morrow worked at the Wild Cherry Bar in downtown Anchorage, and according to her friends, she had been last seen on November 17th, telling them she was going to meet a man who had offered her $300 to pose for pictures. But Sherry never returned, and her disappearance, like many others in the area, had gone largely unnoticed until now. Anchorage police had seen a disturbing increase in the number of missing persons reports. particularly involving women who worked as prostitutes or topless dancers. Yet, these cases had not garnered much attention. The transient nature of these women's lives meant they often moved from city to city, disappearing and reappearing years later. But with the discovery of Sherry Morrow's body, detectives began to suspect that these disappearances were not isolated incidents. Something far more sinister was at play. The investigation into Sherry Morrow's death was just beginning when, on the night of June 13th, 1983, a new lead emerged. A trucker passing through Anchorage spotted a young woman frantically waving her arms and calling for help. She was disheveled, her clothing torn, and a handcuff dangled from one wrist. The trucker, sensing her desperation, pulled over and picked her up. The terrified woman, who identified herself as Cindy Paulson, told the trucker she had been kidnapped, brutally assaulted, and was moments away from being flown to a remote cabin where she was sure she would be killed. She begged him to take her to the Big Timber Motel, where she could contact her pimp for help. After dropping Cindy off at the motel, the trucker drove straight to the Anchorage Police Department and reported the encounter. Officer Greg Baker was dispatched to the scene, where he found Cindy, still wearing the handcuff, waiting in the motel parking lot. As Baker removed the handcuff, Cindy recounted her terrifying ordeal in detail. She had been approached on the street by a red-haired man in his 40s, who offered her $200 for oral favors. She agreed, but as the act began, the man snapped a handcuff onto her wrist and pulled out a gun, threatening to kill her if she didn't cooperate. He then drove her to his home in Muldoon, a well-to-do neighborhood not far from downtown Anchorage. Once inside, the man launched a vicious assault, abusing and torturing her with sadistic brutality. He bit her, and at one point, used a hammer on her. After the attack, the man told Cindy he was going to fly her to his cabin in the mountains, assuring her that if she cooperated, he would let her go. They drove to Merrill Field, a small airport in Anchorage, where the man shoved Cindy into a small plane and began loading supplies. Knowing her life was in imminent danger, Cindy seized an opportunity to escape. As the man's back was turned, she bolted from the plane, running as fast as she could until she found the trucker who had saved her life. Cindy's description of her attacker, along with the details of his plane, led police to Robert Christian Hansen, a local baker with a reputation as an avid outdoorsman. When confronted by police, Hansen denied ever meeting Cindy Paulson, dismissing her allegations as a ploy to extort money from him. "You can't rape a prostitute, can you?" he sneered, confident that his alibi, which placed him with two friends on the night of the attack, would clear his name. For a time, it seemed Hansen's alibi would hold. His friends corroborated his story, and without further evidence, the case began to grow cold. But on September 2nd, 1983, nearly a year after Sherry Morrow's body was found, another gruesome discovery was made along the Knik River. The partially decomposed remains of 17-year-old Paula Golding, a topless dancer and prostitute who had gone missing 5 months earlier. The autopsy revealed she had been shot with the same .223 caliber bullet as Morrow, confirming detectives' worst fears. They were dealing with a serial killer. Desperate for answers, Anchorage investigators contacted the FBI for assistance. In response, Special Agent John Douglas, a legendary criminal profiler, was sent to help develop a profile of the killer. Douglas quickly zeroed in on Robert Hansen as a prime suspect, noting that Hansen's small stature, heavily pockmarked face, and severe speech impediment matched the profile of a man who had likely been ridiculed and ostracized as a child. This kind of background, Douglas theorized, could lead to deep-seated anger and a desire for revenge. Revenge Hansen might exact by torturing and killing women who represented everything he felt he could never have. Douglas also noted Hansen's reputation as a skilled hunter, surmising that he may have grown bored with hunting animals and turned to humans as his new prey. If Hansen was indeed the killer, Douglas suggested, he would likely keep souvenirs from his victims, small trophies to commemorate his conquests. With this profile in hand, investigators began to apply pressure on Hansen's alibi witnesses, threatening them with charges if they were found to be lying. The strategy worked. Hansen's friends eventually admitted they had lied to protect him and revealed that Hansen had been committing insurance fraud, hiding items he claimed were stolen during a reported burglary. Armed with this information, State Police Sergeant Glenn Floth obtained a series of search warrants for Hansen's property. On October 27, 1983, police followed Hansen to his workplace and asked him to accompany them to the station for questioning. Hansen agreed, seemingly unconcerned, but as he spoke with investigators, 2 teams of officers were executing search warrants at his home and plane. Initially, the search yielded nothing directly linking Hansen to the murders. But as the investigation was about to be called off, an officer discovered a hidden space in the attic rafters. Inside, they found a trove of damning evidence: a Remington 5.52 rifle, a Winchester 12-gauge shotgun, a Thompson Contender 7mm single-shot pistol, an aviation map with specific locations marked, newspaper clippings, jewelry, and ID cards belonging to missing women. Most crucially, the officers found a .223 caliber Mini 14 rifle, the weapon used in the murders. With this evidence in hand, Hansen's house of lies began to crumble. Back at the station, Hansen continued to deny any involvement in the murders, maintaining his innocence in the face of mounting evidence. But as investigators presented him with the items found in his home, the weight of the truth began to press down on him. Robert Hansen, once a respected member of the Anchorage community, now stood exposed as the sadistic predator behind the brutal killings. Despite his continued denials, the evidence was overwhelming. But to secure a full confession and understand the full extent of his crimes, investigators knew they needed to break Hansen's resolve. Facing a growing list of charges, including assault, kidnapping, theft, and weapons offenses, Hansen realized that his chances of avoiding conviction were slim. On February 22, 1984, Hansen and his defense attorney, Fred Dewey, met with Anchorage District Attorney Victor Crum to negotiate a deal. Hansen agreed to confess in exchange for certain concessions. He would plead guilty to the murders of 4 victims and serve his sentence in a federal facility rather than a maximum security prison. The DA also assured him that he would not face charges for other potential murders if he cooperated fully. With the deal in place, Hansen began to reveal the dark and twisted nature of his crimes. His confession was chilling, offering a glimpse into the mind of a man who had taken pleasure in the suffering of his victims. Hansen described how he would approach women, often prostitutes or dancers, on the streets of Anchorage, luring them with promises of money in exchange for favors. Once he had them in his car, he would pull out a gun, forcing them into submission with threats of violence. I'd pull out the gun and say, "Look, you're a professional. You know there's some risk in what you do. If you do exactly what I tell you, you won't get hurt. You'll just count this as a bad experience and be more careful next time," Hansen recounted. He explained that he wanted to instill fear in his victims from the very beginning, to make them feel helpless and completely under his control. Once he had them subdued, he would take them to his small plane, fly them to his remote cabin in the wilderness, and there, the true horror would begin. At the cabin, Hansen would subject his victims to brutal assaults and torture. Afterward, he would strip them naked and sometimes blindfold them before releasing them into the forest. But this was no act of mercy. Hansen was simply giving them a brief head start before he began to hunt them down like animals. Armed with a hunting knife or a high-powered rifle, Hansen would stalk his prey through the woods, relishing the thrill of the chase. For him, these hunts were not just about killing. They were about domination and control, about proving his superiority over his victims. As Hansen described his twisted game, investigators were reminded of the short story, The Most Dangerous Game, by Richard Connell, in which a Russian count hunts shipwrecked sailors for sport on a remote island. Hansen's crimes were a horrifying real-life version of this fictional tale, with the Alaskan wilderness serving as his hunting ground, and the women he abducted as his prey. To help investigators locate the bodies of his victims, Hansen was given a large aerial map of the Anchorage region. On this map, he marked 15 sites where he had buried his victims, 12 of which were previously unknown to authorities. However, due to the vast and rugged terrain, locating the exact burial sites was a daunting task. Investigators decided to take Hansen on a series of flights over the area, allowing him to pinpoint the locations from the air. On the morning of February 24th, 1984, Hansen boarded a military helicopter with a team of investigators. Their first stop was along the Knik River, near where the body of Paula Golding had been found. From there, they flew east to Jim Creek, west to Susitna, and then south to Figure 8 Lake and Horseshoe Lake. At each stop, Hansen guided the team to the grave sites, where they marked the trees with orange paint to signal the locations. By the end of the day, Hansen had revealed the locations of 12 previously undiscovered victims. As investigators began excavating the grave sites, the full extent of Hansen's brutality became evident. Over the next few months, the remains of 8 women were recovered from the sites Hansen had marked. On April 24, 1984, the body of 23-year-old Sue Luna was found by the Knik River, along with the remains of 28-year-old Malai Larson at a parking area near the old Knik Bridge. The following day, investigators discovered another body at Horseshoe Lake, which they were unable to identify and referred to as Horseshoe Harriet. 2 more bodies were found on April 26th, Teresa Watson at Kenai Peninsula and 24-year-old Angela Federn at Figure 8 Lake. 3 days later, on April 29th, the body of 20-year-old Tamara Tammy Pedersen was discovered 1.5 miles from the old Knik Bridge. The final body, that of 41-year-old Lisa Futrell, was recovered on May 9th, just south of the same bridge. Despite Hansen's confession and the recovery of these bodies, not all of his victims were found. Some, like 24-year-old Roxanne Eastland and 22-year-old Andrea Fish Altieri, were never recovered, though Hansen admitted to their murders. Hansen also denied responsibility for 3 other disappearances. Those of 17-year-old Megan Emmerich, 22-year-old Mary Thill, and 17-year-old Celia Beth Van Zanten. But investigators strongly suspected him in these cases due to the check marks found on his map. On February 18, 1984, Robert Hansen pleaded guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder in the cases of Paula Golding, Joanna Messina, Sherry Morrow, and Eklutna Annie. 1 week later, on February 27th, he was sentenced by Superior Court Judge Ralph E. Moody to 461 years plus life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Hansen was then transferred to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, where he would spend the rest of his life. By May 1984, the remains of 8 victims had been recovered, but the true number of Hansen's victims was likely much higher. Hansen himself hinted at this, saying he couldn't remember exactly how many women he had killed, but investigators believed the number could be as high as 21. Hansen's life behind bars was a far cry from the freedom he once enjoyed in the Alaskan wilderness. In 1988, he was returned to Alaska, where he became one of the first inmates at the newly opened Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward. Hansen's wife and 2 children attempted to remain in Alaska, but after 2 years of harassment from the community, his second wife filed for divorce and left the state for good. For the families of Hansen's victims, there was little comfort in knowing that the man responsible for their loved ones' deaths would never walk free again. The scars left by his crimes would never fully heal, and the memory of what he had done would haunt them forever. On August 21, 2014, Robert Hansen died in prison at the age of 75. His death was attributed to an undisclosed but lingering health condition. With his passing, the man known as the Butcher Baker took many of his secrets to the grave, leaving behind a legacy of terror and unanswered questions. Even after his death, the story of Robert Hansen continues to fascinate and horrify those who hear it. His crimes, like those of the Zodiac Killer or Ted Bundy, remind us of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most ordinary of faces. Hansen was, by all outward appearances, a respectable businessman, a loving husband, and a father. But beneath that facade was a monster who hunted women for sport, driven by a deep-seated need for power and control. The case of Robert Hansen serves as a grim reminder that evil can exist in the most unexpected places. The remote wilderness of Alaska, often seen as a pristine and untouched paradise, became a hunting ground for a predator who found pleasure in the suffering of others. And though Hansen is gone, the memory of his crimes will linger, casting a long shadow over the land he once called home. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember the story of the butcher baker and the darkness he brought to the last American frontier. Think about the women who fell victim to his twisted desires and how their lives were cruelly cut short by a man who saw them as nothing more than prey. Thank you for joining us tonight on this unsettling journey into one of the darkest chapters of Alaskan history. The story of Robert Hansen is one that stays with you, a haunting reminder of the evil that can hide behind a friendly smile. Here at Slumber Darkly, we bring you these stories not just to intrigue, but to remind us all of the importance of vigilance, of the need to protect those we love from the unseen dangers that may lurk in the shadows. As you prepare to close your eyes tonight, remember to lock your doors, check your windows, and keep those you love close. The world is full of darkness, and we must all remember to seek the light. Until next time, sleep well.